Hey, thanks for joining us today for this Idea Lab. Idea Labs are free monthly trainings from Libraries for Digital Equity. We start with a quick little micro training. I'm going to aim for about 10 minutes here, and then we're going to get into the discussion. That'll be the remaining 20 minutes of our time. We are just recording the first 10 minutes, so the rest of the program will not be recorded. So our topic today is how to talk about TikTok. I'm Liz Gabardis, and I get to host us. So first off, in April, the U.S. Congress passed this legislation calling for divestment. They're not calling it a ban, they're calling it divestment. And what this means is there's concern about TikTok and about its owners, frankly, about it being owned by the Chinese government or controlled by the Chinese government. And so this legislation calls for divestment, where the core pieces of TikTok's business model will be owned outside of China. In the U.S. is the goal. Now, let's talk about where this is coming from. So one of the big concerns is data privacy. So this is something we should be concerned about as librarians. Obviously, this is something that's on our mind. How much is being collected by our devices, by our vendors, by our web traffic, web use, and where's that going? Who has it? Who has a right to it? Of course, this is pitched in this legislation as national security, that there's an unsafe amount of data that is shared with foreign governments, or that particularly sensitive data that users didn't realize was being shared is now available to foreign governments. So that's one aspect of this. Something very interesting about this call for divestment is that when this legislation was first in committee and it was being looked at, there was a real split. People weren't sure if this was a good idea or not. And it wasn't a split on party lines. It was just kind of unclear. But there was this classified intelligence briefing, and the representatives who were on the committee were apparently completely convinced, because they left this committee meeting totally in support of this ban. And of course, it's classified, so we don't know what that intelligence was, but whatever it was, apparently it was pretty convincing. I'm curious, but I don't know that we'll ever quite hear exactly what that argument is. The other piece of this is this idea that there's a proprietary algorithm behind TikTok, behind the app, that is what makes it work. And the fact that we can't see that algorithm, it's kind of a black box, makes it suspicious. That's the idea. So these kinds of algorithms are going to be behind, all of your favorite social media or any app, anything that's serving you content. What it's going to do is look at what you engage with the most, what you spend the most time on, what keeps you on the app, and then it's going to feed you more of that. And so, it's a pretty straightforward, way to farm engagement. Of course, we know from research that these algorithms feed us rage and clickbait and really low quality information sources, because that's what gets interaction. So again, this is a library concern, that these algorithms are reducing the quality of information that we're receiving. Now, the other side of this is because this is kind of a black box, because we don't know what's going into it, there's this question of, can this algorithm be used to feed propaganda, to feed the American populace with information that will sway their opinion in a way against their interests, even against U.S. interests. And this is also an interesting one. This is something that libraries should be concerned about. But something really interesting happened right before the congressional representatives voted on this bill. And so they were a couple hours away from the vote. It was becoming clear to TikTok that they were going to lose this. They weren't going to get the outcome that they wanted. And so they sent an alert. And it went through the TikTok app to every one of their, I think they say 135 million U.S. users. It went to all of their U.S. users. It was this full screen pop-up. And apparently it said something like, don't let the U.S. government block TikTok or ban TikTok. And then it had a field where you could put in your zip code. And you put in your zip code, and it automatically connected you to a phone call to your congressional representative's office in D.C. So you see this pop up, you say, oh yeah, I don't want that. You click, here's my zip code. And immediately you're on the phone with a staff member for one of your representatives. So that's an interesting tactic. That happened, and hundreds and hundreds, thousands of calls start rolling in immediately. For hours and hours and hours, the phone lines at the Capitol were swamped, and at office buildings were swamped. I mean, these representatives are getting more call volumes than they can possibly manage. It's nonstop. So all of these congressional aides, tell these stories of getting nonstop phone calls for hours and hours and hours, and people are pleading, people are begging, crying about TikTok, that they need their TikTok. And the problem is, I assume TikTok's goal was for, registered voters who are informed about the issues and want to call their representative and say, hey, I have a First Amendment right to this. I assume that was their target audience. Who it actually hit was children. And so the people who were calling Congress are kids. And this was in April. And so they're in school. So staffers can hear, these kids are on the playground. These kids are they can hear the teacher saying, hey, get off your phone. We've got a math lesson to do. I mean, can you imagine? I think as a representative in that situation, that would have been such a convincing case that the app actually did have the power for propaganda, for this large scale, sway of opinion. Creating that kind of a public, force and mobilizing all of those people at once. Boy, what a bad move on TikTok's part. Now, here's the other thing. If Instagram had a pop-up like that, do you think it would work the same way? If they planned it out that poorly and made it seem that emergent and hit every user without a lot of information and said, just tap this button, do you think a lot of people would say, sure, yeah, and then end up on the phone with their congressional office? Probably. I don't think that level of ability to exert an opinion or to sway an opinion is strange, is an outlier for TikTok. I think that's going to be the case. So there are a couple other things to think about as well. The U.S. is calling for divestment, which means ByteDance, that's the company that owns TikTok, has to sell the U.S. portion of operations at least, or the piece that controls U.S. operations. So who has enough money? That's going to be billions of dollars. And we're not sure who's interested in it. Very few people have publicly said that they would be interested in it, and that is really a huge amount of money. The other question is, would the U.S. even approve it, whoever that buyer might be? Other big tech companies probably have the money or might be interested in acquiring it, but that would look like too much of a monopoly. That would probably be an issue for antitrust. And so it is unlikely that someone like Google or Meta would be able to actually purchase TikTok. Interestingly, a few years ago, TikTok was looking at a partial sale, and one of the people they were talking with was Walmart. I am intrigued to see what a Walmart-owned TikTok would be. But anyway, the other question is, will China approve it? They didn't actually get to that stage when they were discussing this with Walmart. Because of how business operates in the People's Republic of China, and because of how startup businesses operate, the government has a lot of control over exports, over sales outside of the country. And so what that means is ByteDance can't actually sell a portion. Well, China has already said that the algorithm, the way that this business works, that is not going to be allowed to be sold. So even if ByteDance finds a great buyer, they're excited about it, the US approves it, China still has the option to say, nope, actually, sorry, we are not exporting this algorithm. We want to keep it. And that could kill the sale. So there's a lot that's up in the air about what might actually happen. Let's talk about what these challenges might look like for our patrons or our students or customers or whoever it is that we are serving. So the first question is this a platform for expression? Is this a First Amendment right, or First Amendment issue? Is this a free speech right? Interestingly, just last week, the Supreme Court actually issued a decision that indicated that platforms, social media platforms, do have a First Amendment right. So they can determine what speech they want on their platform. It did not, well, that leaves us in kind of touchy ground as far as the users on the platform, because they have to abide by the platform's terms of services or terms of use. And so their speech may be limited by that platform. So can you really still claim that that is a platform for free expression if they are still not allowed free expression? I don't know. This is going to be interesting because back in April when the legislation passed, it was pretty obvious, pretty instantly clear that TikTok would legally, they would challenge this, of course, and it looked like a lot of their legal argument was going to sit around First Amendment rights of their users. So I'm very curious if this Supreme Court decision might impact the strength of this argument. Another question. This is a big one that I would love to see coming from patrons instead of coming from librarians. But either way, if it's getting discussed, great. Are US-owned tech companies any better about our data? Are they any more aligned with US interests? Are they any more likely to care about the public good, the general population's welfare? I mean, there's recent work from the Surgeon General actually that a lot of these social media sites are really damaging for kids. That's not great, and it's not any different between TikTok and between these other tech platforms or social media platforms. The data that is being stolen on our phones by Apple, by Google, by Meta, Microsoft, that is then packaged and sold across the globe to anybody that wants it. That's happening, and it's been happening for years. That's also not unique to TikTok. So is our data in any better hands if TikTok were sold to some US-based company? I have a hard time saying that that's any better. The other question is actual enforcement. How would this work? How would this actually work that TikTok no longer appears on your phone? So I actually am excited about this because I think it's a great opportunity for some education and skill building with our patrons and our students. I think it's great to have a reason for a student to say, hey, how come this thing happened on my phone? Hey, how can I control what's happening on my phone? And for us to have, an inroad to be able to say, yeah, why can't you download any app you want? Only the apps that Apple allows. Why can't you block ads? Doesn't that seem like something you should be able to do? And, have a little bit of discussion about autonomy and about people's right to control their own online experience and how that might conflict with a website's, terms of service, how this is a win for advertisers and not for users. I think there's, great potential for discussion there. Oh, the other thing I forgot to mention about enforcement is if you can still access this as a website, as not just an app. And I think that's a really important information-seeking skill, is this website is, for some reason, it's been flagged. I'm not supposed to reach it. How can I reach it anyway? Or why have I decided that I need to reach it anyway? This is all about assessing your information sources and then being able to actually access them. So that feels like a really important information-seeking behavior and information-seeking skill. Again, something librarians should be concerned about. Okay, now let's get into our opportunities here. So I think our big opportunity is, as I've been saying, starting these conversations, using these questions to get the people that we're serving thinking critically about these issues. One of the things that I think it's really worth bringing up is who has the right to control the information that's available to you? If someone is trying to ban a book, who has the right to decide whether a book is or isn't in your library's collection? Who has the right to decide whether an article gets published on on the New York Times? Like, who is the editor and how is that person decided? Who's the collection development manager at the library and how is that decided? And then, in this next step, what restrictions has the government already created or might they create in the future that are going to control the online information, the online content that you can access? Another thing that's really worth considering, who can see your data and how can they use it? This is everything that's happening on your phone, all of your activities, all of your thoughts, your texts, the people that are in your contacts, your travel plans. Who can see that? And what are they able to do with it? And the answer isn't just TikTok, and it isn't just, feed it to the Chinese government for some sort of surveillance program. The answer is most of your apps can see most of what you do, and they can do anything they want with it because there's not comprehensive federal legislation around your right to privacy. But this is a conversation worth having. And then one more question that I would recommend here is, where else is your free speech controlled? Where else is the platform that you use exerting some censorship or some influence over what you're choosing to say or what you're allowed to say? Where are you censoring yourself so that you don't run into issues with your platform? Probably lots of places, but I think it's worth thinking about, how does our society monitor us? How does our society censor and control our speech? And how do we find platforms where we can express those things freely? My big point here is really just, use this opportunity to ask questions and spur that critical thinking with our patrons, because I think that can make the hugest difference in how they understand these things, is getting them to ask questions, to get them started thinking, and then letting them ask questions themselves as they explore this further. So that is what I have for our prepared portion for the Idea Lab. We're going to get into our discussion now. And so I'm really curious to hear from you.